one big aspect of being a game designer is understanding psychology, understanding how people respond
Mhm.
to their environments. So there's you heard of the fundamental attribution error, which is like you see somebody doing a thing, and then you assume, hey, that's just the kind of thing that that person does, right? Like that's just a thing that's baked into their persona. So maybe you see somebody on the street yelling at somebody just randomly. You're like, wow, that person's a jerk, right? It's possible that maybe they're yelling at somebody who just attacked them. Like you don't really know what exactly it is that's happening, and maybe this person has never yelled at anybody before, and maybe they never will after this. But you just caught them in that moment, and that's now something that you believe about that person. And I think understanding that people sort of like who they are is a really really potent combination of something internal and external, right? So people respond to their environment, they respond to their circumstances, they respond to how they're treated, just all these different things. And so when it comes to learning, when it comes to the grades, all that stuff, you can, like, you said that you can't like educate the passion into somebody, but you can educate it out of them, which is unfortunate, and that comes to do with the psychology of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, which is, it's there's all these studies about how, like, as soon as you start paying somebody to do a task, they want to do it less, right? Because now they've all of a sudden started to think about the value of the thing that they're doing instead of just enjoying it and getting the inherent value that comes from it. And of course, like any kind of reward punishment system, like a grading system or something, can only really serve to do that. And it's unfortunate, but I don't really know of a better way, and I think that's the problem. I don't know.
Do you ever find yourself pursuing research then to design your games? Like, are you seeking this out actively?
Yeah, but it's always to meet a specific end. So I think a really weird example is so we have this game Crashlands, and in the game you crash land your escape pod on this alien planet. You got to go harvest materials, and you always come back to your base, right? Like you set up your little base, you put floors down and walls, and you can build furniture and stuff. You go out and you collect materials. You come back to your base. And there was a time where the game was structured such that instead of being in the middle of this area, you were on the edge. So you would kind of land like on the edge of an island. And as you got toward the center of the island, things would get more difficult. So the enemies would get stronger, and the materials would become more valuable, and that kind of thing. And it felt terrible. And it doesn't make any sense intuitively because who cares? Like you're just going out in the world and collecting materials and coming back, right? And then we came across this study of how spider monkeys forage. Okay. And researchers had tagged spider monkeys and tracked their movements and noticed that they would create this kind of looping spiral pattern. So they would have like a central base of operations, and they would kind of go out north one day for a couple hours and get some food and come back. And the next day they'd kind of go northeast and loop back and come back. And then the next day they go southwest and loop back. And sometimes they would like loop out farther, but it was always like built around some centralized point, and it was always like they would always end up making a circular pattern, right? And so we thought maybe this is kind of baked into people as well. Like we have this idea of there being a home, like you have a home base, and it feels like that should just be in the middle. It should just be in the middle of everything. And as you move out into the world, you're going to make these patterns, and you kind of loop out and you can go farther and farther. And so we started watching players' movements once we transitioned to that model. And players were doing the exact same thing that these monkeys were doing. Uh, so the way that we kind of approach these problems is, we always have a theory of like, okay, here's what we want the player to do. Let's build this game system and see if it works. And most of the time, it doesn't work on the first try. So that's when we have to go in and dig in and do the research and try to figure out what's happening. So
And I wanted to talk to you about design by chaos. So, this is the planning process that you spoke about at the Game Developer Conference this year. What does that mean to design by chaos?
Sure. Well, it's the method by which we make our games, which is essentially we operate on a very high level concept that we kind of work toward. If you're Are you familiar with the concept of a biased random walk? This is something that bacteria do, which is bacteria. They can sort of detect whether or not, or like sort of like concentrations of chemicals in their environment. Okay. So all they really know is like, hey, there's more of this than there was a second ago, or there's less of this than there was a second ago, right? And so what bacteria do is they just randomly flip on sort of like a timer. Like every couple of seconds, they'll flip around and go a different way. And if there's more of the stuff that they want, they'll flip a little bit less. Okay. So over time, they end up right smack in the middle of the nutrients. And this is called a biased random walk. Um, so so we try to be pretty humble about what we know about the world, and we believe that we're probably wrong about everything, and that we probably know just as much about what's going on around us as that bacteria knows about what's going on in its, I don't know, droplet, whatever it's in. Um, and if you think about your past experiences in life, uh, almost every time you make a plan, things end up pretty differently. I mean, every time, right? So, like, you get up in the morning, you're like, "You know what? I'm gonna go to the gym today." And then you don't, right? You just don't, 'cause so you just changed your mind at some point, or maybe it snows that day or whatever. So you don't know what's gonna happen 6 hours from now. Um, and so when we think about how large game companies produce their games, they do so on these 2-year-long timetables where they've got a process. You know, they've got their pre-production. It's been 6 months, concept art, game design documents, team of designers. They hire up exactly to fit the needs of the project. They pitch, they get a budget from their publisher. Now they have milestones. They gotta hit those milestones on a timeline. Something that we know about game companies, and I don't know how much you guys hear about how the games industry tends to treat its employees, but crunch is a plague across the entire games industry. Employees of game studios tend to work 80 hours a week, just constantly, all the time. They tend to get paid half to a third of what somebody with their same skill set would get paid in a different industry. Um, it's to the point where, and actually, so I have another GDC talk that I'm working on for a couple months from now, and I referenced the fact that people who've been in the games industry a long time call themselves veterans, like as if it's a war or something, you know, like as if they're just surviving. So it's a brutal industry, which to me says that model doesn't actually work, right? Like how could it possibly be that you could spec out this project, make these plans, and every single time the only way to get it done is to work everybody to the bone until they basically die, right? It means your plan was just wrong. And then also games get postponed, they go over budget, they launch with these horribly buggy, just messes, and then they have to do day one patches to fix all the thousands of things that went wrong. So, so there's a clear process problem there, and it comes down to having an incredible amount of confidence in your ability to see the future. So we say, I don't think so. I don't think you can do that. So instead, we try to operate in the present, and we basically just continuously reinterpret and iterate over the game as we see it, and we try to just sort of like continuously wiggle the game around like that bacteria until we get it to the point where it lands somewhat close to what our original vision was. And sometimes our original vision is wrong, and we have to kind of recalibrate that. Um, but as long as we are continuously iterating on it and getting it toward a point where it's more fun, more interesting, um, then yeah, you know, it'll just become what it is, and it's gonna be fairly fun and engaging at pretty much every point along the way because there's no specific like set of, you know, all right, here's the 30 exact things that need to be there for the game to be done. You know, we can just put it in a player's hands at pretty much any point and it's still fine and it's still fun. So that's the philosophy that kind of goes behind how we make our games.